Carl Jung, he was writing something about Nietzsche. And I don't know if you're familiar with Nietzsche's idea of Apollonian and Dionysian,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
there's a claim that when Nietzsche was young, he was in a forest somewhere and he
Okay.
encountered a person and it
Mm.
freaked him out. And that to him was Dionysus. But Carl Jung says
Oh, okay.
actually who he encountered was Odin, the figure of Odin. And I
Mm.
thought that was very interesting because I've also heard claims that the figure of Odin comes from the East. You know, he was like an Eastern
Mm.
mythological figure that somehow found his way into
Mm.
Scandinavia. So those were just some things I was thinking about what you were saying.
Sure.
I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
So what I can say, especially what you say now about the Eastern character coming into Scandinavia, that is so that's something that Snorre suggested, right?
Mm.
So Snorri Sturluson. So just to make sure, because it's for anyone hearing, sometimes I would say Snorre because that's how we would say it in Norway. That's the Norwegian version of the name is Snorre. It's Snorri in Icelandic. So I might use the two interchangeably. But what Snorre did, especially in Heinz Kringla, which is that collection of kings biographies, and also in the Edda, in the Prose Edda, and the introduction to the Prose Edda, he suggests, and very much based on trends in Europe at this time, that the gods were actually humans originally. So this idea is called euhemerism, right? It's the Homeristic view of religion, the idea that the gods themselves have roots in real humans who have been deified later on, right? Um, so he has this idea that they were actually humans who came from Troy,
Yeah.
bizarrely enough. But
Interesting,
so,
right?
so to us, it is very bizarre nowadays, right? Because they were actually in the Battle of Troy, and some of them left, and then they moved over north, and they settled in Sweden, and then one of them was called Odin, and the other one was called Thor, and so there's a whole story going on there, and as they did it, they were very big fans of in the Middle Ages. They really try to make connections with words and etymologies of words, right? Which gave rise to these sort of folk etymologies, or these etymologies that are not quite true, just based on the fact that they sound roughly the same. But well, so what he suggested is that that's why the gods are called the Aesir. It's because they're Asian. Right? So that's the connection that he made in his mind that, oh, Asia, Asian, Aesir, that's why. Um, And of course, we do not have any evidence. And we do know that was a very common trend in this period of time of trying to make your own origin story and point it back to learned literature, right? Because
Yeah.
the stories of Troy would have been part of the school literature, essentially, of those who
Yeah.
were
And not
rich
only
enough,
that, but
perhaps,
it's
to
also
have literature.
a claim to Rome because Rome
It
comes
is.
from Troy, you know, and Rome is
Exactly.
considered the paragon of glory in a lot of European history.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So they sort of wrote themselves into world history, right? That's what
Yeah,
they
it's
tried to
interesting how
do. Like
humans do that.
everyone yeah, right, exactly. So wait, we're important too, you see. So we obviously are the same as everyone else. We also came from Troy, which is a common thing, right? This is something that you see even in England, for example, right? In England, you have this text, Histori Britannum, the history of Britain or the kings of Britain by Geoffrey of Monmouth, who did the same thing, really. Not with the gods, however. What he said is that there was someone from Troy called Brutus who settled England, and that's why it's called Britain, right? Because Brutus, Britain. Sure. So that is the same sort of connection being made that Snorri did with Troy, with the Trojans and Asia. So it is a very common trend at this time. So I wouldn't put too much credence into that story. Certainly, it was part of the trend, and that's something that I also tell my students when I teach at the university is that you have to keep in mind oftentimes that the texts that we have oftentimes say more about who's writing them than what's written in them, right? So even though they're histories of maybe stories of the gods and maybe of ancient kings of old, times, oftentimes those texts tell us more about who's writing them rather than what's the content of the text themselves. It tells us
Right.
more about the mindset, perhaps, or the cultural setting of whoever is writing them. And what's not is the same, right? It says more about the fact that it was written in the 1220s and 1230s than it does about, ninth century Scandinavia to a certain
Yeah.
extent. So
You're
that is
you're
something that's
absolutely
also
right.
we also have to keep it in mind.
Yeah, no, I'm a
Yeah.
writer. I can attest to that. You're absolutely right.
Yeah,
And
right?